Hello, everyone, and welcome to Pet Working, a podcast focused on pet care and animal health. I'm here today with Andrew Bleiman, EVP of Tractive, one of the leading pet trackers on the market. As you may have seen in my article from a week or so ago, it was recently National Lost Dogs Day, and Andrew and I go back several years and have attended a lot of conferences together, everything from Super Zoo to Global Pet to the Pet Care Innovation Summit, where new and innovative things are being discussed in pet care. Andrew and I both tend to show up. So great to see you, and thanks for joining us on Pet Working.
Thank you for having me.
So, Andrew, I wanted to get you on because, I think we've talked a lot over the years about the market for pet trackers, the motivations for people to buy a pet tracker, and the general level of adoption of this technology. And I think we first connected even before we met at a conference, chatting about the human animal bond and incorporating that into marketing for pet trackers. And I think your response at the time was, we don't really do a lot of that because what sells these things is people want to buy them after they've lost their dog. It sort of takes that, unfortunate event that everyone hopes never will happening for people to go back and think about, what do I need to do to prevent this from happening again? So I guess I'd kick it off to you. Where do you see the market today? How many, what's the level of penetration in terms of pet trackers? How many dogs, and you now have a product for cats? How many people are adopting this technology?
Sure. Happy to discuss all of this. I think, since our discussion a couple of years ago, I might, build on my reflections on, the human animal bond and sort of the impetus for most consumers to purchase a pet tracker. So, I don't want to discount the human animal bond. I think that's absolutely central to, why people care about their pet, and their thinking around products, devices, practices that'll help keep their pet safe. I think that said, there are certainly, life events between owner and pet that are more likely to get a consumer thinking about the need for this type of device, right? And loss is certainly a central one. Others could be a new pet. Others could be fostering a pet. It could be a change of geography. You moved from a home with a fenced-in backyard to a place that doesn't have a fenced-in backyard. It could just be evolution in the pet's life stage, right? So maybe as a puppy, it was constantly monitored, and then it's venturing out. Maybe it's venturing out with a walker, and it's an extra layer of peace of mind. So there are multiple components of that that all can be drivers. When it comes to the space generally, we see really exciting growth, certainly for our device, but we think across the space generally. A lot of that is just driven by awareness. Tractive has been in business for 10 years. And when we first started, this wasn't a category. This wasn't a product that existed. Over time, more people have become aware, but still, I would say a small fraction of the total, market for this type of solution is aware that this category even exists.
I would agree with that.
Yeah. And that's great news for us, frankly. It's a challenge, right? But it's also an opportunity. And I think, if we look at, our customer research, likely less than 5% of the pet owning households in the US are aware of the existence of GPS pet trackers.
Are aware. And
are aware of the existence of
so
GPS.
we're not even talking adoption.
Right. Not even close.
So
right?
if we're going to say, what is it, around 70 million households with a dog, and
we also have a cat tracker as well.
Yeah, I saw that. There's not, and that's fairly unique to Tractive. I mean,
in the United States, we're the only one offering a dedicated cat tracking device.
Obviously, you could purchase a whistle or a fly collar or something like that and try to adapt it to your cat, but those are more specifically made and targeted to dogs. So if we're and that, I think you hit the nail right on the head in terms of what I was thinking in my experience is, and I guess going back, to our first conversation and in my personal experience, I didn't think or know about the existence of GPS trackers until we lost Peony for a couple hours. I took her mountain biking. We'd been working on off-leash training all summer. She was good for about a half an hour, and then she took off. And there was a down log. I couldn't get over it, and thankfully I'm there shaking a treat of an Altoid tin with treats, and that she heard it and came crawling out of the woods and sat down. And when I went over and gave her a hug, it was a very happy reunion. She melted. But from that point on, it was, okay, what can I do to make sure this doesn't happen again? And this was back late 2017. So I don't think Tractive was as well positioned in the market as you are today. So Peony still has a fly collar just because she's comfortable wearing it and it works. But it was a Google search, and Fi popped up, and it was like, okay, this is GPS. This will stay with her. I think a lot of people think, that when they get their pet and they get it microchipped, that's somehow going to let them know where their pet is. I think there is this misconception that, oh, my pet's microchipped, I can't lose it. Well, that only works if your pet is microchipped and someone finds it and brings it to a place where there's a microchip reader and they can call you back. Yep. And I think statistics I've read are there's 10 million dogs and cats that are lost in the US each year, and 80% of those are not found. So we're talking 8 million pets that are getting lost and not reunited with their owners annually. And you and I are just talking that only 5% of pet owning households, so 5 million households, are even aware of the existence of pet trackers.
Yeah.
And of that 5%, how many, what are you seeing? What's the total market? How many pet trackers from your perspective are being used in the US right now? And where do you see the market going?
Yeah, so the fraction is very, very small. So the number of pet trackers out there in the United States with any meaningful scale is very limited. It's sort of probably count on 3 fingers. And while there are new entrants, I wouldn't want to put a guess on the total number of users, but my guess is of that 5 million, something like 10 to 15% might have had a tracker at some point.
So you think only 1 million to 1.5 million pet trackers in the US?
Maximum. And I would say that's, over years, right? So, most of our customers stick with us for quite a long time. So, often the full life span of their pet, or the lifespan of their pet up until they get to a point where they're older and there's just not a flight risk. So I would guess that is, around the total number sold in entirety in the United States over, the last few years. Getting back to that 5% number, of that 5% of households that say they know about the existence of GPS pet trackers, a huge chunk of them, when asked for more detail, refer to a microchip, right? So they're like, oh yeah, like a microchip. My pet has a microchip, right? Quite a few people whose pets are chipped, and shelters will tell you this all day, think that if their pet goes missing, they can pull up their phone and in some way use an app or some other technology to find the pet themselves. And that's just obviously not the way microchips work, right?
No,
And so
they're passive RFID, right?
right. And so
Exactly.
as you said, someone else needs to find your pet and then bring it to a vet or a shelter that can wand it and, get the animal's information and hopefully notify you. So we absolutely encourage microchips, just like we would encourage, tags, right, with the information. It's kind of a layered solution to keeping your pet safe. But, in most pet owners' opinion, it's a whole lot better to be able to find the pet yourself, right? And not wait 2 hours or 2 days or 2 weeks for someone else to find.
Yeah. When you talk about layers, I think that's a good point, right? You can have, if you can't find your pet with the GPS tracker, if the battery goes dead, if they're missing for a long period of time, you have a better chance of getting them back if they're microchipped than if you're relying on GPS alone. But if you're relying on a microchip without GPS, you are completely at the mercy of somebody else finding them, you happening. I can't tell you how fortunate I felt, after looking for Peony for 2 hours, in the woods with my mountain bike. When, I heard the jingle of the collar and I was like, man, I hope that's her. And she showed up. But it was a very helpless feeling, being like, I have no idea. And now I can look at my phone with a GPS tracker and I can say, oh yeah, she's here at home. She oftentimes wants to ride along the car when we take our kids to daycare. And, I will get an alert I'll get back in the car and I'll have an alert that she was alone because I've walked into the daycare center and she sits in the car for a few minutes. But, when we look at that these small numbers, we're talking even lower adoption than pet insurance. And, and not all that great of an expense. The tracker will probably cost you $50 to $200 depending on what you buy, and you'll pay a subscription fee for the GPS of around $100 a year. What do you think is the big barrier to educating the consumer about pet trackers?
Yeah. Well, I think it's, sort of multifaceted. Part of it is they are still relatively new, right? I think another piece of it is, the vast majority of pet owners are not, San Francisco, techies, right? They are not looking for whiz bang tech. They're not looking for technology typically to solve their problems. That's not where they go first, right? And so there really has been an evolution where the technology has gotten so user-friendly, so easy to set up, right? Like the analogy I like to give is, programming your VCR, right? There should not be a barrier there for people to set it up, regardless of their familiarity or comfort with tech, right? It should just be totally intuitive and straightforward. And I think we're really there. So I think that's a big piece of it. I'd add finally that, most of the companies doing really innovative stuff with, GPS pet trackers, either are, independent companies that were startups and are, scaled to some degree. Whistle, obviously is now with Mars, but that was their roots as well, right? And for these startups that are, growing their business year to year and living year to year and innovating year to year, you just don't have the marketing war chest to invest in sort of educating, the 100 million households in the US with Super Bowl ads about the existence of this new technology, right? So that's okay, right? We can take a more incremental approach. And, we see the progress, right? We see massive year-over-year growth. We see increasing awareness. One thing that's actually been very helpful relatively recently, in the scheme of pet tech, was the introduction of AirTags and awareness that AirTags are used by some people,
right,
as a pet tracking device. Yep. And now Apple, very deliberately, first search result you'll see that's not sponsored is the Apple page saying, "Do not use this to track your pet." Right? Apple proactively wants to talk people out of using it to track their pet, in part because they're so easy to swallow and get swallowed so often. And it's super dangerous if and when that happens. Also in part because it's a very limited solution. So, Bluetooth is great if you're in an area with a ton of devices that are Bluetooth enabled. They say within 60 feet, I think the reality is more about 30. And so if your pet's in a downtown core, like downtown New York, that might be a very viable solution, right? But the moment you get out to the suburbs, let alone more rural areas or a vacation or a hike, it may only be your phone that's, anywhere near that pet, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So, we really don't see it competing for the same customers. It's a very different use case. If people choose to do this, despite Apple's suggestion that you do not. But it also sort of introduced the market in a bigger way to the fact that
you can leverage the marketing power of Apple.
Those types of solutions. Yeah, exactly. Actually, Peter, if you don't mind, I'd love to touch on one other point you made before about the anxiety associated with losing your pet for a short time before it returned. That anxiety is real, right? And when people go through it, again, whether it's 2 hours or 2 weeks, the math around a tracker that's $50 with a subscription that's under $100 for a year is pretty straightforward, right? To a really wide variety of pet owners, right? This is not just sort of your premium pet owner who might be ordering, fresh food direct, right? But, it's more than that. There's a real risk when your pet is missing that, something could go wrong, right? And so whether it's traffic, whether it's coyotes, whether it's other dangers, there's a really compelling reason to be able to want to find your pet yourself faster.
Quickly. Yeah, absolutely.
And the other thing I'll add to that is a lot of pets are very difficult for, strangers to recover on your behalf, right? So there are certainly plenty of dogs that are skittish. And, I would argue that most cats are not sort of amenable to someone they don't know running up and trying to grab them.
100%. I mean, to me, it like you said, personally, I looked at the math and I was like, you know what? It's worth it never to feel that way again. It's also, when you think about, how people feel about their pets, how they feel, that they're part of the family. It's a very compelling case to get it. I think it gets back to our first conversation. I think a lot of people don't think about it until it happens, right? You don't think about the bad event until you faced it, until you've lived that, and then you're like, okay. And I think you made a great point, that for a lot of companies in this space, there isn't the marketing dollars available to have to drive broad-based adoption of these solutions. Maybe an interesting partnership would be, reaching out to Apple and getting them to add links to other pet trackers on their webpage. But
I like this idea. If you know the right person, please introduce me. So
yes, I'll see if I have anybody in my network that's at Apple. But I'm curious because I've seen statistics that, right now the market for pet trackers is like just under $1 billion. And I think growth wise, look, getting to potentially like 2.6 billion within, or by like 2030. Do you see that as feasible? Do you see that as an accurate reflection of the market?
Yes. However, I think we will get to, 2 and 3x market size far more rapidly than that. Again, I can't speak to other trackers out there, but, we're seeing, 150% growth year over year in the US.
And is that in terms of total adoption, total revenue, including new units purchased and subscriptions?
Active subscribers. So
150% growth in active subscribers. Okay.
Yeah. So the growth is super fast. I think it'll take very little time for this entire market, to double, triple, quintuple. I think we're there.
Now, how many active subscribers does Tractive have in the US right now?
1,000 active subscribers worldwide.
How many?
800,000 active worldwide.
Okay. And you guys were in Europe. Tractive is based in Europe, and you're the leading pet tracker in Europe, correct?
Correct. Yeah. So we're far and away the king in Europe. We were the first and only tracker in Europe for a very long time. We launched 10 years ago. So we've been in the space for a long time. We're much newer to the US. We arrived in earnest about 3 years ago. But one of the advantages of being headquartered in Europe is it's very common to take your pet across borders to other countries. So the device was developed with interoperability with different telecommunications networks, across all of Europe and worldwide. So we have active users in 175 countries around the world. And in the US, what that means is we're the only tracker that works with AT&T, Verizon, and T-Mobile. Our competitors all work with one network. So that interoperability with telcos is material for us in growth.
Sure. And so now, where do you see? You mentioned earlier that you could probably count the players in the U.S. market on 3 fingers. I'm assuming you're referring to yourself, Whistle, and Fi. Are those the top
Correct.
3 within?
Yeah. I'll also share, a lot of our, Whistle and FitBark, which is a great company, by the way, have focused a lot, in addition to pet GPS trackers, on activity trackers that are standalone activity trackers, right? So there's not a connectivity component. So a lot of their, their sales historically have been, built on that side of the house, which is different. While Tractive does offer, Fitbit style activity and sleep tracking, wellness tracking, it is always tied within our GPS pet tracking device.
Do you see now? I know Whistle has the standalone. You guys offer the activity, sleep, and everything else together. We're seeing new entrants, into the market. I think at Global there was one that had a heart monitor. Invoxia, I think it was. And if you were to break it down, I mean, is that a compelling driver for people to get a pet tracker? I mean, are we seeing the point, have we reached the point yet where people are considering like, oh, I want to be tracking how many steps a day my pet's taking, or I want to be tracking whether my pet is scratching too much or whether it's sleeping inconsistently?
It's a great question. So it is compelling to a lot of customers. But I will say that for the vast majority of pet consumers, it's currently a nice to have. in comparison to the value proposition of being able to retrieve your pet when they go missing, which could be a potentially urgent, life-threatening situation, right? So to be clear, it's 100% the direction Tractive is headed, right? Our next gen devices are going to be able to do some amazing things around wellness tracking, around alerts, when trends in your pet's health, and comparisons to tens of thousands of other pets that are the same breed or same age or both.
Will you have a heart monitor?
I will not confirm or deny which features will be available. But I will say, we see a lot of the opportunity there in terms of, relation or value add that's built with that data in collaboration with vets and veterinary companies, pet health generally, animal pharma, insurance, right? When it comes to the consumer themselves, I think that's much further behind in terms of education and priority currently for the consumer than even the GPS pet tracking component.
Sure. Now, you kind of led into my next question there. I know Whistle has and Mars have the Pet Insight project where they're linking the data from the Whistle tracker, marrying it against veterinary data at Banfield clinics. I think subscribers can get a free Whistle and free vet visits at Banfield. As you move into this next generation of Tractive devices with, added pet health data, do you see potential partnerships that you can develop? I know that the end goal for what they're saying with the Pet Insight project is to be able to use activity tracking as sort of a red flag, in a predictive model to identify, adverse health conditions early and to be able to catch them and get dogs and or cats in for care. Probably just dogs because it's Whistle, but do you see that? Is that part of the roadmap at all? Do you see potential there, or?
We absolutely do. We think it's really exciting what Mars has been working on around the Pet Insights initiative. I think we're really interested to see, when and how they put it to work in the market, or within their constellation of businesses. But, we definitely think that opportunity there is tremendous when it comes to pet health monitoring and outcomes. And, these are conversations we've been having with animal health companies for years, right? So I think and insurance companies, and I think there is sort of broad general agreement that it will get there eventually and will be a market opportunity eventually as well, not just a health opportunity for the pet. I think there's an open question on how fast we get there on both sides, right? That said, we are aligning our tech roadmap already to realize that. And whether that opportunity is with DNA companies or insurance companies or other pet tech companies, we definitely see the synergies.
Or leveraging all of the three. I mean, if you can tie pet DNA data together with activity data and health outcomes data, that's sort of the gold standard. I think that's from my perspective, that looks like what Mars is moving to, given that they have Wisdom Panel, that they have Whistle, that they have the veterinary clinics, and they can marry all of that data. And
Mars may be the one to get us there faster, but I think one of the huge disconnects that still exists is how you put this data to work in a way that makes sense, given the math insurers use, or given the way vets interpret these results. And I'm reminded of when we had our daughter, and she was an infant, and we had a camera that could monitor our daughter's sleep cycles, right? And it was an expensive, dedicated, crib cam. And we chose that versus a general camera because of all of this great data, right? And when we met with our pediatrician, we would show her that data and she would say, interesting, I have no idea what to make of this, right? Because it's a different language and it's a different type of data than they are used to consuming and interpreting.
And I think a lot of them are reluctant to trust it if they didn't run the test themselves, if it's not in a controlled environment. I mean, similarly, when I'm at the doctor, I've worn a smartwatch for years, and every year at my physical, I'm like, I could download the data from this. You could look at it. You could see, no, not interested. Don't trust it. But I do think there is that potential precipice here. You mentioned insurance. I'm reminded of years ago when insurance started to get into big data and realizing, like, look, there's a lot of other factors out here that we can pull in to correlate new models, to identify where better risk, customers who are better risk, to identify different means of leveraging discounts or things of that nature. So from a product development side, giving pet insurance companies access to this data could be huge in terms, especially if they could cross-reference it to breed and look at, like, okay, this, or potentially looking at it from a perspective of almost taking more of a health insurance model, which pet insurance is underwritten as P&C, so they probably would want to be looking at it more from like the auto insurance, almost having it like a right track program, a telematics type program for dogs. But you could also go on the health insurance route, or maybe splitting the difference, a life insurance model like a Health IQ, where you're giving discounts to people who can prove that they're active and fit and healthy.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've launched our own insurance business in the UK, brand new. And part of that is to offer great options to Tractive customers. But it's also to learn about how we marry that data together and provide a more informed insurance offering based around that. So
yeah, I mean the contributions of external data to actuarial models, and thinking about, okay, what are untraditional variables that we can introduce or analyze to potentially assess risk. I think that's huge. Yeah, no, it's very exciting. Andrew, I know I've kept you on far longer than I think we planned here, but are there any other players in the market? I know we talked about Invoxia at debuting at Super Zoo. We saw PitPat, or that was at Global Pet, excuse me. We saw PitPat kind of come into the U.S. market at Super Zoo last August. Any other players that are out there that you think have exciting technology that are potential growth threats in the space?
Yeah. So, a couple thoughts. So, the first is that the biggest challenge is just awareness within the space, right? And the total addressable market is so huge and so under penetrated that there's a lot of space for multiple players. So the pizza pie is large here. And so we're less concerned about other players and more focused on how do we build that awareness for us and others. Thank you, AirTag. That said, I've been in pet tech now for 6 years. There's never a shortage of exciting new ideas and new early products. That said, it is a really hard space to build scale in and do profitably. I certainly am always interested in what's new and what's out there and what's innovative. That's where our heads are at too. But when I start to pay attention closely is, when they are driving, really material growth. So we'll see, which of these entrants find success. Another thing I think we've touched on in the past is, IoT devices, so connected devices in the field, right? This isn't in your home necessarily, right? It's like outside in the world, in the woods. Connectivity is hard. It is a hard challenge. It is a hard technical challenge to provide with a really high degree of reliability. I think it's one thing to build a product. It's another thing to scale up a tech team a support team that is hyper responsive because, when things go wrong, these can be urgent situations. There's a lot into it, and it's a long game, right? It's a lot more than just putting a product in the market and letting it run.
And not everybody's going to have the advantage that you do with the tech that can work across all of the major carriers. You're going to have to pick one, and that makes it even harder to get it to work in the woods.
Correct.
People to have problems, depending. Are there resources out there that, customers can access if they're considering pet trackers to see like what's the best in their area if they know they have strong coverage from a particular carrier in their given geography?
Yeah. So, beyond Googling, one resource that we have available on the Tractive website, so on the product pages for our devices, is you can actually check connectivity by your address or zip code. And that is very current data on all providers that will tell you, how good the connection strength is. If it's, strong, okay, weak, or there's not enough information. And we make that available for a bunch of reasons. One is because a lot of customers are curious, right? They're not sure if, it's going to work in their area. They know that, friends who have other cell providers, maybe they don't get service there. So they know it can be an issue. But the other real reason is we don't want consumers to purchase the device in an area where it's not going to work, really well. So we want to give people a heads up if there could be a potential for low connectivity or no connectivity, to avoid the frustration of, trying to work a device that's just not going to perform.
That makes sense. Well, everyone out there, if you are a pet owner, dog or cat, consider adopting a pet tracker. You can go on Tractive's website. You can see if there's good connectivity in your area. I will say from personal experience, and as Andrew and I have discussed, the investment in the tracker and the annual subscription pales in comparison to the feeling that you might have lost what I think a lot of us consider to be a member of our family. So would hope that we can get these adoption levels up beyond the 1.5% that we talked about. Hopefully the next time we chat, we're looking much more than 5% awareness and much more than 1 to 1.5% adoption.
Well, thank you, Peter. I really appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for being on. And thanks everyone for joining another episode of Pet Working, a podcast focused on pet care and animal health. I'm Peter Kenseth, signing off, and we'll see you again soon.